Welcome to Cultivated Live for Thursday, May 2nd, 2024. I'm Jay Rosenthal, the co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of this program, Cultivated Live. Since we launched Cultivated, our goal has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you, our viewers and readers, with the most important, insightful, and useful information. And we do that in two key ways. First, our daily newsletter, which is called Cultivated Daily. You can find it at cultivated.news. And we also do it through this daily live stream, which is called Cultivated Live, which streams through our LinkedIn channel and our YouTube channel. So follow us and subscribe. To how to do all those things, you can find the link below. In a moment, I will bring up Krista Raymer, the founder and CEO of Vetrina. That is the foremost cannabis retail consultancy in North America. We'll talk about what 420 data looks like with a little bit of hindsight and even if it's reliable. And we'll probably touch on the subject of the week as well, which is, of course, rescheduling. Now, let's get to the news driving the cannabis industry today. If you're reading our newsletter or you're watching this program and you haven't been in a cave for the past 24 hours, so you already know the big news, the federal government will reclassify cannabis to the less restrictive Schedule 3. If you want to know what that means for you, your business, and for your cannabis policy more generally, we've got you covered. The Department of Justice also clarified to Marijuana Moment on Tuesday night that Schedule 3 will be the new classification. We're going to share what we know about the potential timeline of when this is all going to happen. Now, keep in mind, this is a living, breathing process, so what's true today could change tomorrow. But here's some news on the timeline. Let's start with the bad news. There are multiple lengthy steps to get from the DEA proposed rule to an actual reclassification, as we outlined yesterday. The entire process could take as little as a few months and be done and dusted prior to the election in November, or could take more than 6 years. The White House Office of Management and Budget has 90 days to review the rule. The next step, the public comment period, will last 60 days. If the DEA has to respond to comments, that could take months, if not years, to wade through. Then, once the final rule is issued, there will be a judicial review. That's when anti-cannabis groups are almost certain to challenge rescheduling in court. And the court could stay the proposed reclassification while the challenges play out, which could take up to 3 years. Politico's Natalie Fertig reports all of this, citing administrative law and cannabis expert Shane Pennington. That's the bad news. Let's get to the good news. Like anything in cannabis, not everyone agrees. Howard Sklamberg, a former top FDA Food and Drug Administration official, said he believes cannabis could be moved to Schedule 3 before November in a National Cannabis Roundtable webinar yesterday. Now, both Sklamberg and Pennington know what they're talking about. That means that this process is so unprecedented. By unprecedented, I mean reclassifying a drug that millions of Americans have legal access to and consume every day, but the federal government now treats like heroin, that no one can actually say with any certainty what exactly is going to happen. We can only look to the process and hope the federal government sees the shot clock ticking like we do. To comment on this a little bit further, Maritza Perez Medina of the nonprofit Drug Policy Alliance said this in a statement talking about rescheduling. To achieve full, true federal decriminalization, marijuana must be removed from the Controlled Substance Act by descheduling it. Descheduling marijuana is the only way to end federal prohibition and the harms it's causing to our communities. Hold that thought into your head because we're going to go to the Senate now. Top Senate Democrats, including Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senators Cory Booker and Ron Wyden, reintroduced the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. That is a mouthful. They reintroduced that yesterday. The bill, if it would be to pass, would go much farther than reclassifying cannabis to Schedule 3. It would fully remove cannabis from the list of controlled substances, effectively decriminalizing it federally, and create a new federal tax and regulations around selling cannabis. Schumer said at a Wednesday press conference the following: reclassifying cannabis is necessary, and it's a long overdue step. But it's not the end of the story. It's not all we need to do. It's time for Congress to wake up to the times and do its part by passing the cannabis reform that most Americans have wished for. Now, Democrats clearly care about pushing cannabis reform ahead of the election. The issue pulls strongly with young voters who Biden and Democrats are desperately trying to reach before November. As well, Biden, Schumer, and other top Democrats have been pushing for reform for years. Voters, whether they're old or young, aren't going to take them seriously if they can't get anything done on this issue. Biden promised to reform cannabis laws in 2020 and reiterated that promise this year's State of the Union. Rescheduling is certainly part of that. But after yesterday's news, this is yet another move to show voters that they are serious and can get things done. But it's also the second time lawmakers have tried to get this bill passed in the Senate. So we will see what happens. Now, it's my pleasure to bring up Krista Raymer, the founder and CEO of Vetrina, the foremost cannabis retail consultancy in North America. We're going to talk about 420 as it looks in the rearview mirror. We're going to talk about rescheduling and what it means for dispensary owners and operators. I'll be right back with Krista Raymer.
Jay,
Welcome.
this is a big week.
It is a big week, and then I when I heard the news on Tuesday, I was like, this is a big week, this is the biggest thing ever. But then that was actually reinforced. Yesterday we had a program that we streamed with Brian Vicente from Vicente LLP. We had Sunday from Safe Harbor Financial. We had
Okay.
Morgan Paxia from Poseidon. We had the CEO of Air Wellness and the CEO of Theory Wellness. And everybody from a slightly different angle was like, this is groundbreaking. It's important to our business. It's going to be have long lasting impacts. I guess we're sometimes so close to it that we can't like zoom out and see the long-term impacts, but it's
Yeah.
going to be big.
I mean, it has a lot of intended and unintended consequences. Like, we built a lot of the businesses that function today under the assumption that the regime today would stay relatively the same. And if that were to change, we could see businesses format their way of operating very differently, I think.
Yeah, I think what we talked before earlier, and part of that is there were some companies that set up as vertically integrated so they could like move the cost and the expenses around so that the ultimate cost of goods sold they would control much
Yeah.
more beginning to end. I guess is that one of the things that might be non-obvious is that some of those companies may be more specific once 280E goes away.
100%. I think 280E led a lot of businesses to go down the path of vertical integration. To your point around being able to control COGS and what that looks like long term. Now, we've already seen like a bit of a trend away from full vertical integration and or what that looks like in terms of selling products within your own environment versus bringing in third party. Like what that looks like today versus what it looks like 3 years ago is very different. That will continue, I think, to evolve. It opens up the door for like more of these conversations around brand partnerships and product development in a different way than what we've seen so far. So yes, you could see businesses go back to focusing on one area of the business instead of trying to be vertical. And I think the other implication of that is that you will also see different types of partnerships developed to be able to bring products to market.
So it's going to be, so there might be a shift within the cannabis sector, but also the retail will see a shift that might look more similar to like traditional retail.
I mean, what's your definition of traditional retail and like what's your model, I guess?
Right.
Different evolution over time for sure. It's like we're
Yeah.
still quite early in what cannabis retail will look like today, what it will look like in the future. And we have this like other complexity that is compounded around all of this, which is hemp. And so I think those pieces all coming together over the next year could see some pretty significant changes to the way that stores are operating.
Yeah. And we had on, like I said, the CEO of Air Wellness, David Gobert, yesterday, and he was saying that to their bottom line, it's like a $50 million more on the bottom line than was there like the day before, if you sort of extrapolate into next year. But also, and we sort of talked about the implication for his business is a big business operating a lot of places, but the actual impact on a smaller business that's had to is even greater, even if the dollar is obviously much, much smaller, but the relative size of the business has a big impact as well. And that we talked to a lawyer, we talked to Brian Vicente, talking about how he's hearing from small and medium-sized businesses too, that this
Yeah.
just could be a game changer and the biggest change in cannabis in 50 years on the federal level, which makes it sound bigger than I'm giving it credit for even.
Well, I think one of the things that we actually don't talk enough about is that when you're a smaller operator, it's really hard to create efficiency. Like the revenue and the way that these businesses are operating in terms of gross margin, this is true in both Canada and the US. This isn't a unique US comment, is that you need a certain level of expertise within the business to understand how to run a really strong assortment and to run really great marketing initiatives. That's really hard to do on a small store number capacity. Like if you only have so many stores and you want to have the best assortment expertise, that's difficult to rationalize under the investment of one, two, or three banners. And so I think that's part of it too. is as a percentage of overall revenue does represent something different because you see efficiency with more stores open.
Something that is, I think, quasi related to what you just said, and that is, we just came out of April. Now it's May 2nd. And the past couple of weeks since 420, it's been like, what does the 420 data say? What does it say? What does it say? What does it mean? Blah, 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 blah. And then to me, I'm going back to something I think you said probably a month ago, is that 420 might just mean a regular April, just like there's a big think in the, on the 20th, and then, down at the beginning of the month, down at the end of the month. But also talk about how difficult that is, one store or many, that it's really only the fourth month of the year and is an anomalous month. And I'm never good at this, but like each month so far it's at a different number of days, different number of Fridays. Like, can you even extrapolate? Is there any data that says April 2024 that is valuable right now?
This is like, I think, one of the biggest struggles with understanding promotion impact to revenue as well as to net results. When we look at 420 this year, there was a drop off before 420, and there was a significant drop off the week after 420. And so between those two, did we see a large enough lift in the revenue and or the profit generated from basically what it looks like is 420 really happened in most environments on the Friday and the Saturday. So we saw a lift on both of those days. Now, that does it offset the loss on both sides? That's where you kind of question whether April is just neutral and 420 is a blip, but you actually have lower periods on the shoulder sides of 420 itself. But to your point, if you look at month over month analysis, it's really misleading so far this year. Every month has different days. March versus April has different Fridays. Fridays are really significant to the business when we think about the average store doing like 60% of their revenue Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And so those days become really impactful in an overall data set. The alternative is to change the way that you are looking at the data to see if there is actual incremental change or improvement. And that would be to give every single period equal value or equal opportunity when looking at that data. And so what we propose as an alternative for year to date is to look at it in sections of weeks, so 4-week periods at a time, and compare the period over period analysis. And that way you have fixed the data set for the number of Fridays, fixed the data set for the number of days in the month, as well as give yourself a true benchmark in terms of what happened in a 4-week period. Gives you a different type of view of the data so far.
Well, not to throw a wrench into all of what you just said makes sense. Not to throw a wrench into like more month over month, is that May has 5 Fridays and a long weekend in both Canada and the US, different long weekends, but it also will skew things dramatically, I imagine. Like 5 Fridays plus a long weekend, it's like you can't really compare that to April or March or February or January. So to your point, like find similar chunks, you can chunk it out and like do analysis on that rather than month over month. Yeah.
That, and like even think about the customers who are purchasing. We're about to experience weather improvement in a lot of markets across Canada and in the US, which usually when we see warmer weather, we see better sales results. And then the other thing is that university students are all done school, or college students, and they are usually working over the summer. They're bringing in their own income. And so how does that also potentially increase the total addressable market in some of these, as well as people moving around? Like if university students live somewhere for the year and then go home over the summer, or college students, like what does that mean in terms of total population? And I think that's an important consideration when we look at this data.
Yeah, it's a push and pull, because if you're a dispensary near a big college campus, that's one thing. If you're at like in Ann Arbor, it's yet another thing. If you are, you might see a drop in sales. Whereas if you are in the suburbs of Detroit, for that matter, like you might see an increased sales because kids are coming home. Big difference there. But also talk about that in terms of product array, because I remember early days before even cannabis was legal, talking about the beverage market having, a potential upswing in warmer weather. I think that's true on traditional beverage as well, beverage and alcohol. But talk a little about that and how you think about that. Certainly like training bud tenders on that sort of type of sale.
Yeah, I mean, consumption methods are different. Like when we work with bud tenders, we're often asking what is the outcome that the customer is trying to achieve and where are they going to be consuming. And when we have outdoor consumption, as well as a lot more events, things like concerts, outdoor park activities, that kind of thing, we see a different assortment of products sell. It's like if you look at stores that are in urban environments versus rural, of customers coming and driving to the location versus walking and taking their product home, we also see different patterns in consumption behavior. So over the summer, we have a tendency to see easier to consume products. So vapes, pre-rolls, edibles, all have a tendency to see a lift in the way that they contribute to either total velocity of units or total revenue of units, just because of the simplicity around consumption.
Yeah, that's like there's a store in Toronto near a huge park called Sip and Smoke. I think it's just pre-rolls and drinks, which I just love the thought that goes into that. It's like, nope, you come here, very simple. We have two things, buy them and go to that park right there.
It's very location based, and it's something that's shared. I think we just have to think about what and how we keep our assortment relevant to our customers' lifestyle.
Absolutely. I've been saying that 2024 is going to be the biggest year in cannabis that we've seen, maybe not from a sales perspective, of course, but also from a moment in time, mostly because if you do it backwards, it's 420, which I kind of like. I know.
Okay.
It's like numerology. I'm really into it. Krista, as always on Thursdays, we appreciate your time, energy, insight, especially during this really important week for the cannabis industry, but also the distance from 420 gives us a little bit of perspective on sort of how to think about that. But I also think how to think about a certain number of weeks versus the actual month is probably super helpful and great insight as people get into their weekend this weekend. So thanks for the time.
Thanks, Jay.
You got it. Thank you, Krista. As always, she joins us every Thursday. That's it for today's Cultivated Live. We encourage you to subscribe to our daily newsletter at cultivated.news. Follow us on LinkedIn. Smash the subscribe button on YouTube. I'll be back here tomorrow, Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on LinkedIn and YouTube. I will be in Maryland at NECAN Baltimore. If you are there, stop by booth 420. Seriously, we're in booth 420. And check in with us. We'd love to say hello. And remember, buy cannabis at your local dispensary. I'm going to do that later today because I am in Maryland, and adult use cannabis is legal here as of earlier this year, or last year rather, mid last year. So I'm going to go get my